So thank you, Varun and Nishta, for being with us here today. Nishta, if like you can just give a brief on your journey, like tell us a bit more about your journey of the book writing process and the books you've published, and maybe let's say a few challenges that you faced, and how was it all for you? How did you get into it, and how was it all for you? If you could just shed some light on that, so that'll be great.
Sure. First of all, thanks so much, Utsav. It's always a pleasure collaborating with Fast India, and this is a much needed initiative. So I'm glad somebody is taking a step towards it. So yes, so thanks again, and congratulations to everyone who has been shortlisted here. For me, the journey of book publishing has been, so I've published almost like 5 books by now. Three have been published with more established publishing houses. One I self-published, and one was a fiction anyway. So I have had my own experiences of publishing a book. I think it's an interesting, and we will talk more about it. But overall, I think writing a book is a very personal endeavor. I think you can do it because you love to write, or you really like the topic that you're writing about. So that is very important, to pick something that really resonates with you. I think that is the key, because it's a long and arduous journey, and you can't do it for any other motivation. There were a lot of challenges. I think we'll talk about them as we cover different questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Nishtha. Lovely, hearing from you about your journey, even though in like a few sentences, but we would love to know more throughout the course of this webinar.
Sure.
Thank you so much. And as you said, it's a long, arduous journey. Definitely, there's tremendous difference between book writing versus article writing versus blog writing. So my question for Varun, following from these pointers, is how would you describe the difference? Varun?
Yep. No, thanks, Charul, and thanks everyone for being here. And really excited to see a lot of people who want to write science books, which the country needs a lot more. So I think I'll quickly tell you, a little bit about my journey, and then from that segue into Charu's question. So as Nishtha was saying, right, that writing a book is a very personal journey, right, and you write about topics which you really, really care about, right? And I think that's generally the driving force. So the first book which I wrote was on the science and tech ecosystem in the country, right? Which was now 5-6 years back. And this is the book, right? And the interesting thing is that this is the book which became the inspiration for FAST, right? So it was asking the question that why science and tech is important for India, what are the lacunas and how to fix it. And the one interesting nugget is that the first TOC I wrote, table of contents I had written for this book, the final TOC doesn't look anything like what I had written first, right? And that kind of part of the journey. And then, as Utsav was saying, I wrote a fiction book, The Bird Farm. But again, it was inspired by what we are seeing happen in the society as a result of AI and the internet, right? And some might have realized that it's a play on Animal Farm, and saying if there was an animal farm of one sort, if we are in a bird farm with the AI and internet society. And the third book is the one which I wrote with Nishtha, where Nishtha taught me a lot about how to write a commercially successful book, right? Tips and tricks, because she had written
this book, yeah.
Yeah, this one, Futurepreneurs. Uh, and uh, and then from that, I've been writing like children books now, and we'll not go into that. Totally different subject. Uh, but so as Nishta was saying, it's a really personal journey. It's also thankless in many ways, right? It takes long hours. You need to really know how to delay gratification, because it takes a lot of time to write a book, and then it takes a lot of time for the book to get a life of its own. And it could happen when you launch the book. Some books become bestsellers immediately, some take a life later. So that way, it's harder than startup. That's the other thing which I do. Writing books and having the passion to write books is a little different. Coming to Charu's question, I think there were two aspects to it. One, how is it writing a book than writing a blog or an article? And I think a related question for this audience is that how is it writing a science book different from writing a science article or a journal kind of thing. So few comments on it, right? First, I think the a blog is going to be somewhere between 1,000 and 1,500 words. And what you are generally doing in a blog is making a narrow, sharp point, right? And a narrative that supports that narrow, sharp point. Uh, Whereas when you're writing a book, you are kind of writing a larger argument around a topic, right? And a lot of people can write blogs, but writing a book becomes totally a different kind of play because you need to have that big picture, think of a topic uh, from all dimensionality as per your audience, right? Sometimes we make the mistake of just trying to say everything about a topic, which is not useful, right? So you need to know who your audience is, what aspect. So a lot of feedback which I was looking at, which we gave to people on their proposal, was that when we read their abstract, we didn't know what they're gonna include and what they're gonna exclude. So someone said, "Hey, I want to say interesting things about neuroscience," but neuroscience is very vast, right? So how do you scope it? That what aspect of neuroscience are you gonna go over, and who's your audience for that, and how you will hook that audience is important, right? Again, related point is that when you're writing a scientific paper or an article, your audience is already interested in the topic, right? With jokes apart, that how many people actually read scientific articles, keep that on the side. They at least read it to cite them. But here you have to interest the audience, right? So you have to see how do you connect the topic to either their daily life, right, or something they're seeing in news, or even their intellectual pursuits, right? Like uh, Brian Green has written this book, The Elegant Universe, right? I think very few things of it connect to your daily life, but yet it connects to your intellectual pursuits, right? So that hook in finding how do you get the interest of the audience is very, very important, and less important in scientific paper, though I personally believe it is important there as well because your audience is already curated out there, right? And I think the second big challenge is that how do you simply explain scientific concepts, right, without dumping it down, right? Like that is really, really hard, right? And that's why, we requested you for sample chapters or a few pages of your chapters because we want to see how do you simplify it, right? And I think if you ask me, that is one of the hardest parts in writing a science book, right? And I can give you a couple of examples, right? Like when I was in class 9th, 10th, I read this book by Robert Kennegal, The Man Who Knew Infinity. Right? And he was trying to explain a very simple concept in that book, that of infinite numbers, and saying that even if you add infinite numbers, it can give a finite answer, right? Now, how would you explain this to a lay audience, right? You can go into all math and so on and so forth. But he explained it in two lines, saying that think about that you have a loaf of bread and you cut it 5 times, right? And then you sum those five, it will be the length of the bread. If you do it 20 times and you sum it, it will still be the length of the bread loaf, right? How about you cut it infinite times, right? And still the total length will be the same, right? And so a very simple intuition which says that, okay, they can be infinite numbers, but they can add up to a single finite number, right? So I think those simple examples, how do you explain it with this, right? Like again, if you read Brian Greene's book, which I'm recently reading, and he's trying to explain the concept of time slowing down when you are going at a very high speed, right? And he just says it very simply, right? And this might sound trivial, right? It sounds very trivial after it is written. It's very hard to think and write it. And he says that, oh, if there's one person in one place, other one is moving, and this person is waving his hand to the other one, you'll see the hand moving in slow motion, right? And that's how he explains that how time will slow down, right? And it stayed with me, right? That's like one example which I recall again and again, that time will slow down, right? So I think just summing it up, right? I think the two important things are getting your hook right, and then being able to explain, first getting the hook right, getting the scope right, and then being able to explain things very simply without dumping them down, right? So Nishpa, please feel free to add anything.
No, I think that's very important. And I just like, I pulled a couple of books from my own shelf, like in scientific thing. I think like Richard Feynman is a great example, right? I mean, his whole theory is that like you should know your subject matter so well that first of all you can explain it to a kid. And the way he writes these books, like, I mean, I'm not a physicist and it's long time since I studied physics, but like you can pull it up and start reading it. So that effortlessness, but it's very hard to do. It comes when you are very, very deeply understanding your subject very well. So that is of course a prerequisite. And again, I think about hooks and all, I think to make it interesting, like again, like books like Free Economics, I think it's blurring it out. But yeah, Free Economics is a great example, but it was written in collaboration with a journalist and a scientist. So like, journalist has a great storytelling skills and all. But I think to explain your concept in a way that can keep the audience engaged is a critical thing when you're writing the book, especially if you are thinking of publishing it in the mainstream media as well.
All right. Thanks. Thank you so much for the lovely answers. It was like very descriptive and like also loved the fact that you went into the details. So that was great. Nisha, I have a question for you over here in terms of like what we just mentioned about the chapters in a book, right? So what are some things that you would say one should keep in mind to form an outline for the book and break the book into chapters to form a logical orientation and a good flow for the book? So what are the things one should keep in mind for that?
Right. So again, very, very important. And this is something the earlier you do, I mean, it might change as you write the book slightly, but still, like, at the beginning itself, what I like to do, I like to create a table of content at the beginning itself and have a understanding that this is what I'm going to cover in the book. And is this going to be an exciting book or not? That table of content itself should like give you a peek that like is this a useful book or not, because if that is not covering enough interesting thing, or if it's just repeating whatever has been said before, then what are you contributing? Maybe you're saying some of the original thing but in a different way, or you are saying something original, whatever it is. So I think chapter layout is very important, and it's good to start thinking about it, the sooner the better. So I mean, two of my books, so No Shortcuts and Unstartup, they were interview books. They were like, so like one had 15 interviews, Futurepreneurs, we did 10 interviews. So each chapter was sort of an interview. So that was easy to do, but still in No Shortcuts, it was a business startup book and one of the earlier startup books after Rashmi Bansal's in a long time. So I divided it by section that like, these three stories are talking more about the business model. These three stories are talking more about sales and marketing. By the way, that is how I met Varun, because I featured Varun in that book. I interviewed him for Aspiring Minds. That was one of the chapters. So I like sections also. Within section, then you can have chapters. So again, depends on the topic of your book, but I really struggled. I had to research a long time before I could create the chapter outline for the Unacademy book, because it's now on a single company. I had to do first a lot of interviews to understand what's the subject matter that I have. And then I had to start collating that what is interesting in this, because not everything is interesting. So what is the angle from which I'm going to write this book? So if you have picked a topic, if you have already that angle, then you can start thinking about chapter, and that itself should look so exciting to me that it looks like, because it will become a part of your proposal also to the publishers. So you should have a good clarity there and be a little flexible. It might change slightly, but it's good to have some map in front of you where you're trying to go. Otherwise, you will be all over the place.
Thank you. Thank you, Nishta, for sharing that. Being all over the place is something that we would definitely want to avoid.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we've learned about planning the book in terms of table of contents, and let's move on to planning the book in terms of timelines. Because India Science Book Fellowship has a timeline of 12 months for the selected fellows to finish their final, manuscript, the book.
Right.
So Varun, what are the best ways to keep track of the timeline for finishing the book manuscript so that you don't fall into the trap of, dilly-dallying to the last moment?
Sure, sure. And quickly just reacting to what Nishta said, right? I really like the word when she used useful. How useful is the book? How useful is the chapter, right? I think a lot of times, we are excited about something that we keeping ourselves in mind while writing the book on what we want to say. rather than thinking about what people want to hear, right? And I think it's an intersection of both those you need to. So I think it's a good hack to keep thinking every time you write another chapter or another 2-3 pages that was this useful per se. On chapter, just two quick things. So as Nishta saying, totally agree that you should write the TOC. It's useful if you, another hack is that write it one step downward. So within each chapter also, TOC within the chapter also you write at that time. So don't only say, oh, these 10 headings. You say what goes inside those 10 headings, which might be 5 to 7 headings in there, because that will tell you that what is going in this chapter. You might then, when you write the heading, you say, अच्छा ये दो चीजें उठा के यहाँ कर देते हैं. Yeah, we change the chapter name because when I see the heading, there's things with. So doing it at least one step down is useful, I think. And the third one is, this is a hack. It doesn't work for every book, but I saw one book, Nishta, and this is very interesting, that each chapter was 4-5 pages, right? And to me as a reader, it gave a lot of gratification because whenever I used to pick up, I
Yeah.
would complete one chapter, right? So
Yeah.
it's a good, I felt it was a good hook, good way to keep me hooked to the book. So maybe some of you can try that thing. On, Charu's question, look, I mean, writing books is really, really hard. If I tell you that I have a formula on how to keep it on timelines, look, I'll be lying, right? There's really no formula. Everyone has their own style and so on. I wrote all my books while I was working, so none of these books have been written as a full-time job. I think what worked for me in principle is making sure you are making progress every week, right? So consistency and making sure you are able, even if you are writing less, but you are writing everything. Every week you are writing at least something, right? Either you write 1 page or 2 page or frame an argument, still write. So never break the consistency of writing is what my tip would be. What really worked for me was waking up early, right? So waking up early and writing it, like when I wrote the bird farm, I already at that same year I had my son born, and yet I managed to complete the book. But and my style was that either wake up early or even even if you get 30 minutes and if you have already jotted down the argument, even in 30 minutes, any time of the day, you say, hey, I've got this window of 30 minutes. Let me just write 3-4 pages because I know the argument, right? So some of these hacks work. I think consistency trumps everything else if you want to complete a book and find what's a good time, right? And last thing I would say is that, as personally, again, this changes from people to people, and Nishta can add how it happened for her. But I generally couldn't write for more than 1 hour in a day. I would saturate, right? Like after writing for 1 hour, and especially if you're writing non-fiction,
Yeah.
where you are framing an argument and so on. 1 hour was the limit, and then I had to do it the next day or repeat.
I agree. I used to write late nights. So that's my time line. But I think that's where, again, having a clear chapter outline really helps. And those sections that sometimes you're not feeling stuck what to write next. You already have that framework in front of you. So you can pick topics that I'm not feeling like this one is particularly challenging. I'm not in the mood. Let me write an easy one today. You can do things like that when you have the whole roadmap in front of you. But I always like to write my introduction and conclusion, obviously, at the very, very end, after the rest of the book is looking almost final.
All right, thank you. Thank you for the lovely answers. And just building on to that, Nishtha, like how does your day look like if you can just elaborate a little bit when you're too much into the writing process, right? Like you just mentioned that you usually write at night, and Varun has written his book. He finds time early morning, right? So just like if you could elaborate a little bit on how does that look like for you, the process when you're
So again, when I'm writing in middle of writing a book, the routine is slightly different. Like the book, at certain point, the book starts consuming you. That's the only thing that's going on in your head. And at one point, you really pick a momentum on it that, like, you are getting a lot of it done in a very few days, as opposed to the beginning will take a long time and will be frustrating. But I think I like to timeline really helps me. When I was doing an academy book, I kind of gave myself a publishing deadline that, like, by this time the manuscript has to be submitted to the publisher. So monthly I had like clear goal in front of me. These chapters I have to finish this month and get it verified. So that time I was writing almost full time on that book, but it happens book to book. I have written a fiction book. One of my first book was fiction books that I wrote like just when I was feeling the flow at night. So the approach could be different, but I highly, anyways, here you have a 12-month timeline, right? So I think they should definitely divide it month to month and make sure that they are reaching those milestones.
Thank you. Thank you. Reaching the milestones is very important, as is setting the milestones. So thanks, Nistha, for that. Since we were talking about flow, and Nistha also mentioned, feeling the flow, there could be times when you're stuck, you're at standstill, and there's this dreaded condition of writer's block. So Varun, do you ever experience writer's block, or have you ever experienced writer's block? And what was your way to, get out of it?
I think it's so again, like I think it's different in non-fiction and fiction, right? Non-fiction, I think it's more that you're not able to frame an argument, right? Or you're not finding the logical step on framing an argument, or if you're trying to explain it, how do you simply explain it? You're not able to understand it, right? And so that would happen, right? And a lot when I was writing the science book. And I think, I mean, I don't have any secret sauce for it, but two hacks, right? One, just do it on a fresh day, right? Like what might look very, very hard on day one might look very, very simple 2 or 3 days back. And you say, like, what was I confused about? Like, kind of thing. And to me, also, I'm a little bit of an obsessive person. So if I don't get it, how to write it, then it keeps troubling me. So I'm thinking about it when I go to the bed in the night and thinking about it when I wake up in the morning and it gets resolved. For you, it might get resolved in the dream. For some of you, right? Scientists see a lot of scientific dreams as well. And I think the other is to hack is to talk it out to someone, right? And sometimes just the act of telling it to a colleague, oh, this is what I'm trying to explain. This is where I stuck. And as soon as you say that, and you say, oh, yes, this is how I will do it, right? And there's some neuroscience going on in there as to why that happens. But I think just finding a sounding board and so on is helpful to get over the writer's block. Nistha, feel free to add.
Yeah, my hack is usually I start reading when I'm feeling like I am not able to write. So reading some of like the books around the same topic, or maybe just watching some YouTube videos also gives you ideas to just unblock something. So in between writing Futurepreneurs, I refer to a lot of science books just to get that inspiration of how they were writing, how they were explaining something. It usually kicks off some inspiration in your mind. So I think reading is always a good hack.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for the lovely answer, Nishtha. And just one more thing regarding this book fellowship. So we are emphasizing a lot on the importance of writing books for a general audience, right? And we have discussed it in the previous workshop also, that how do we ensure that the book is catering to like the masses in India, right? Like how, so the question is like, how do you decide the tone of your book? Like, do you keep it lighthearted, or do you keep it serious? And how do you strike a balance if you have to? Over here, we are popularizing non-fiction science books. So how much of a scientific jargon is advisable to use so that lay people understand it? So if you could answer that, Nishtha.
Again, so the very fact that you're saying that you want to make it a mass market book, or you want it any layperson to be also able to pick it up and read it, so that shows that the book has to simplify things. So as opposed to writing a research paper, as Varun explained, that is a very focused audience, and you can take the liberty of using some advanced jargons and everything, because they will know that. But here they might not know it. So of course, like, we had a glossary in our Futurepreneurs book also, because we were using some term which are not like, common readers would not know them. So understand your reader very well. Have a persona in mind that this is going to be probably the most prominent reader for our book. So for example, for Futurepreneurs, we were writing about AI and deep tech startups. We were thinking the audience would be like, deep tech entrepreneurs in 20s and 30s, and maybe some professors who are doing deep tech work, and they want to understand what's happening in India. So somebody who has a general understanding of deep tech science, but also very curious about it. but still we simplified the concept so that even if an engineering student is picking it up, they're able to see that, oh, we work on some of these projects, but this is how a startup is doing it on a commercial scale, for example. So you have to understand, I mean, mass market is a very fuzzy term. No no science book is going to be completely mass market. So still you need to have an understanding of who is my audience. Is it more of a students, professors, is it it's of course not a textbook in your case, but a textbook will have a very different approach. It will have a cut and dry, maybe serious tone. It has to be accurately checked. But I like to keep my books very, very conversational and not make it too serious. So I like to have that balance, that reader doesn't feel too overwhelmed that I'm being taught something in a class. So they should enjoy. And again, I think Feynman and Freakonomics are extremely good example of it. That's why they inspire me. So you have to find your inspiration. So there would be books out there in the bookstore or library that you like in your genre. So maybe go through that, and then you can pick up something as a, this is what I want to emulate. Maybe that is also, I do that with mine. So just understand our audience very well. But yeah, I don't see the point of making it extremely serious. It can be a bit too dry. Treat it like a, so like that 4 or 5 page chapters thing Varun is saying is a very good hack, because it there is that gratification for the reader. Oh, I finished a chapter. Even if there are 100 chapters in a book instead of 20, he feels that I've made a progress. And the page turner philosophy, right? I mean, fiction, you have to absolutely follow it, but you can follow it non-fiction too. Explain it in a way, leave it in a cliffhanger kind of thing, that okay, this is going to come up in next thing. So you can be innovative like that. And I'm seeing some YouTube videos and all are doing an excellent job at it. They're explaining very, very deep scientific concepts in a very entertaining manner. So maybe find inspiration somewhere, see what inspires you, but treat it like a fiction book in terms of readability, but write a non-fiction book is what I would say.
Great, great. Thank you. That was wonderfully explained with examples and with your preference of the tone itself, conversational. I love reading conversational tone wala books and articles.
Yeah, I
So
mean,
thank you.
nothing against the serious cut and dry books. Absolutely. It's just like my style. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Nishtha. I just wanted to ask Varun if your take is a little bit different, or do you agree with Nishtha? How is it working for you?
No, I agree. And as I said, right, Nishta has a better sense of general audience than I do. But I can just tell two things, So when I was writing my science book, the first one, I was totally delusional. I thought this is a general audience book, right? So a lot of you might be thinking that what you are writing is a general audience book, and it may not be, right? So that is something very, very important, right? Like, uh, it's very funny, right? Like, I also write Hindi poems, right? And when I was younger, I would write really Sanskritized poems, and then people say, "Samajh nahi aa raha, aap kya likhte hai?" Right? Then I dumped it down and made it easier, and I thought I had made it easy, and I still tell them, "Say, pata nahi kya likhne hain," right? So your own metric of have you simplified it enough might be totally different. We just forget how we were when we were, let's say, in class 10th, 11th, 12th, or how someone else. So my recommendation would be that get 2, 3 readers from your audience early on. Show them your synopsis, show them your chapter, right? That will be way more insightful than anything else, right? Because your own perception of the level of difficulty, or the interest in the subject might be totally kind of off, and it happened to me, right? And and I continue to think how to make it simpler and simpler, but retain the meaning, right? And that is the art, as Nishka was saying, in Freakonomics, and so on. So I think that's one thing I would say. Just find someone who you think is your audience and give them to read, right? And that will be a better test than anything else. And as we were just discussing, and Nisha was also saying, short chapters. The other thing is that also short books, right? Like generally 200 to 250 pages is a good first book to write, rather than trying to write 500 pages, right? As Nishta would tell you, and we were more careful when we were writing futurepreneurs, right? That lower number of pages means lower price, means more selling. They're actually, when people buy books, they see how thick they are, and if they're very thick, they don't buy it, right? So even
Yeah.
simple things like that, right? When you're thinking about a general audience or a mass audience book, is useful.
Thanks. Thank you, Varun. That was great advice, both on the readers aspect, reader testing. And yeah, so now we're delving deeper in the direction of language of books, continuing with the tone. So what literary techniques and devices are good to use for nonfiction book writing? So you mentioned use a lot of examples. What
So,
other devices and techniques could be
yeah, so
useful?
I think I'll pick up from one thing which Nishta said, right? She said that write non-fiction, but write as if you are writing fiction, right? And there are very good examples of this, right? So Ramesh Hariharan, whom some people here might know, wrote a book which was on genetic diseases and how do you find it, and it illuminates you about genetics in general and its health connotation. But he wrote it as case study, right? That a patient came, what was happening to that patient. Of course, he anonymized it. And I think for his case, they were genuine case studies, but you can just use it as a literary instrument also, right? Which is that you have changed your, let's say if you're talking about neuroscience and art, you can create a fictitious person who's doing something and then, use that as the hook to explain it, right? Then another chapter, another fictitious person with another thing and so on, right? So make it into stories, right? Even when you're writing a non-fiction, you're telling a story. Never forget that. I am telling a story,
Right.
right? There was another book I recently read a little bit of, which came, I'm forgetting the name of the book. It was on education and it's written by one of the ex-secretaries to Government of India. And it's on how education should be. And she's totally fictionalized it, right? There are these kids in a village, a new school is getting built up, and it's very innovative. The different classrooms are like different parts of the brain. So one classroom is called cerebellum, one is called cerebrum, so on, so forth, so forth, right? And that's another instrument to make it interesting for the reader, right? A third one, which is another interesting book which you guys might have seen or not, is Logicomics, which tells the story of Bernard Russell, and it's a graphic novel, right?
Hmm.
And how has he or she made it interesting is, and I'll tell you my experience with it is that so Bernard Russell is reading in actual life he's reading some papers by some authors and citing them, and in the graphic novel he's actually meeting these scientists, right? So he's doing a Europe tour and meeting these mathematicians. Now, saying that he's reading these papers would have been way boring than going and saying in the book that he's met this scientist, uska ghar aisa tha, and so on and so forth. Now, the problem I personally had with this book was because of my own love for objectivity was that I actually thought he's meeting this scientist. And then when I went back, I said, oh, he didn't meet them. Oh, this was fiction, right? Kind of thing. But look, that's an instrument again, which you can use, right? Where things which you are saying can be built into stories, right? So just making it a graphic novel or case studies or stories is useful. If you are following the usual style, right, of non-fiction without, writing stories, you still need to be storytelling. Some instruments which we have used which work well were one are vignettes, using vignettes, right? So they are things which are complex. So vignette is this separate blurb which you generally include, right? For author, a problem is that how do you want to use this new term or use this new concept? Your audience may not know it, but you don't want to get it into the main narrative because the main narrative will get choked, right? So you make a small vignette, a one-page vignette, which it refers to, right? That is one instrument which we use a lot in future planning, right? To explain anything from everything, right? Like what is happening in AI, right? So there's in AI for speech, and there was a vignette within the chapter of vernacular. Right. The other thing, of course, is diagrams and flow diagrams, right? Like again, we did one on Stand Life Sciences, and to explain gene expression, we did a very simple diagram that what gene expression is, right? So whereas a diagram, if you make it in the way we make scientific diagrams, then the purpose goes away, right? It's a cartoon diagram or a toy diagram of what is happening, right? So that's another instrument. And a third thing which works well, again, which we used in Futurepreneurs, is this. We had these insights and lessons coming at different parts of the chapter, right? So some highlights, some trivia, which, because books very quickly become monotonous, especially non-fiction, right? So if you, in this now research also in this, that if you can increase the neuroplasticity by surprising them or giving them some monotony breakers, uh, that would help, right? So I think these are so. But as Nishta was saying earlier, right, that conversational is her style. I think the most important thing is that adopt a style which is natural to you as a person. If you will try to force fit, right, you can write a verse book, writing it as stories, then you would have written it as a narrative, right? So pick up your own kind of style which works best for, especially if it's your first book. I would recommend that do what you naturally um, like to do. Nishta, anything you want to add?
No, I think storytelling, I was just going to use that phrase, is the key to everything. And it will not, maybe not come naturally to you right away, but gradually you can like build upon it. And another book I would just mention here, not exactly science, but so David Rock has written a book called Your Brain at Work, explaining the neuroscience from a business perspective, like how to make the most of, how to be productive by understanding your brain, how does it behave and all. So he has taken an example of a couple and then gone through 24 hours day. So from morning, like this is the situation they are facing at home, that their baby is throwing a tantrum, not going to school. So what happens in the brain at that time, and then they are running late for a meeting, so how to manage that. So each chapter is about like a part of their day, and done very excellently. So maybe again a very academic subject, but they have taken this example, so it's very relatable to you because these are the things happening to you in the day to day. So yes, try to find maybe like a storyline, a character that you can use to just explain your concept, and for that you have to understand your concept really really well, then only you can use these techniques. So yes, storytelling, highly recommended.
Wow, great. Great insights from both the speakers here. Thank you so much, Nishtha and Varun. Uh, the greatest advice for me was innovate your own style, find out what works best for you. So yeah, thank you so much. We're nearing the end of this session, and if there are any more questions, I see that Alino Sumi had a question about academic publishing, which Varun has actually answered. Well, I would shift gears here a bit. We've been receiving quite a few queries on the peer review process for books. Now, we know for journals and for academic publishing, peer review is a standard process. For book writing, how different is it? Would Nishtha or Varun like to take this and basically walk us through the concept of book writing, peer review for book writing?
So peer review, I don't know as much. Varun can, I think, throw light on it. I can talk about the general publishing part of it, like how will publishers react or treat you. So you want to go first, Varun?
Sure, sure. See, I think peer review is very important in our case, is because we just need to make sure that whatever comes out is evidence-based, right? And that is when you're writing a science book, that is one value we need to adhere to, right? And uh, I know that most of the people who will be here writing books will be experts, uh, but we do tend to make mistakes, right? And overgeneralize based on the evidence which is out there, or our hunches get into the book narrative and so on, right? And it's fine to have your hunches and things to get in the book till you are calling out that this is my hunch, or this is what I think it is, rather than saying this is. So being able to manage that clearly, that what is evidence based and not, um, is very very important. That's where we think the peer review process is very very important, where there's some valued colleague of yours who is also an expert in the field, who can read the manuscript and and give you comments from the point of view of factual correctness and evidence basis of the book, right? And anyway, it's a very very uh, I mean, every time I've given a book for someone to read and give me comments, those comments have been helpful, right? It just gives you a second perspective because you're so much in your mental block in thinking about the book. So, but yes, here it is for objectivity, making sure it's evidence based, making sure our hunches and hallucinations and what ChatGPT writes for us doesn't, you know, go away from scientific objectivity. So please, find a good peer reviewer who's enthusiastic. In fact, and I've read many books where there are multiple peer reviewers, right? Like people want to make sure that they are making a real contribution, and multiple people feel in their area that it is a contribution per se. And I'm not saying contribution in the sense of new new scientific results, but contribution more from the point of view new way of thinking, writing a book on the topic, right? So that's it. That's what I would say. And yeah, Nishta, it will be very useful because the next stage is writing a book proposal for and if you can share some of your thoughts on how to write a good book proposal, right? And we have written one between ourselves, but that will be very useful. And if anyone also has questions, they can also raise their hand, on their screen, other than posting it here, and we'll try to answer it.
So just to add to that peer review part, like also like, so when we did interview based book also, and especially when I'm writing startup books, a lot of data is not public, right? I mean, like it's internal going on in these startups and you don't know if they're quoting right numbers or not. So something like we try to verify as much as possible, because ultimately it's your name on the book, it's your reputation on the line. So you should be very careful with whatever you're putting there. Don't just write it based on what somebody has told you if it's an interview kind of a book. So just keep that in mind. Try to verify it through different sources. There might be some data sets that you can check, or at least check with the founder again and again. Put a disclaimer in the book where you're not sure. But yes, take this very seriously because especially it matters more in the science kind of books. Coming to the book proposal part, again, so I'll talk more for if you're writing for a commercial book per se. If you're writing a textbook or academic book, the approach could be different. Those publishers have their own guidelines. So in India, you can pitch directly to publishers. In US, it's mostly happens via literary agents and all. But in India, a combination of both works. So like whatever publication houses you're interested in or something, they will have mentioned some submission guidelines on their website. So it's very important you check that. Even literary agents have their own submission guideline kind of thing. So read that carefully before sending them anything. That some of them ask for 1-page synopsis followed with a table of content and then 3 sample chapters. Some will ask for first chapter only. So whatever, it could be different. So just check with them that you understand their requirement. Don't send them something which they are not asking for, because they so publishing industry is still pretty, I wouldn't say they have, it's still a backward looking industry, I would say, and those people are still very much in their heads. So you have to follow their thing. And it's a slow process, but a good proposal, I feel, is again, it gives you clarity on, they want to see why will the book sell. If I'm talking from a commercial angle, if it's a mass market book or a book that you expect to sell in bookstores, why will it sell? Who am I writing for? And also, what can you do to promote the book? You should include it somehow. What is your standing? What is your credibility in this field? If you are a professor, if you're a journalist or something, that helps immensely. So mention how you are planning to promote the book, even if they don't ask it, because that always helps. If they feel that you yourself have your own good distribution channel, that can help immensely with publishing the book, as we have seen time and time again. So synopsis, a very 1-page briefer as to what this book is about, and then who is this book for, who's the audience, and what is the originality, what is the innovation you're trying to do here, if there's an angle like that. Include the table of contents. It always helps them give a picture, as Varun was mentioning, that from abstract alone, it's not very clear to me what you're trying to include or not. So table of content helps. If you have a word count in mind, things like that, mention that also. So mention the theme and then your credibility in the space. If you have good social media following, or if you're associated with an institute which can help you with promotion or distribution of these books, that also helps immensely. So keep those things in mind. Always put yourself in the shoes of the publisher. They want a commercially successful book. less than 5% of books actually succeed. So they want to see that you understand that. You may be passionate about your subject, but do you understand book marketing, and do you understand how it's going to sell or not?
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, sorry, please go ahead, Varun.
No, thanks, Nistha. And I was just gonna add, right, because it's gonna be a science book, right? And this goes back to the first question which Charu asked: what's the difference between a blog and a book? Your synopsis should not look like a blog. It should look like a book outline, and and what is the big picture you're gonna paint, and go into some specific examples of details which you kind of do. And I think both Nishta more and I less, but we both have talked about again and again target audience. Whenever you're writing it, be very clear who target audience is. Right? There have been like books which are for no target audience because it's too difficult for one, and for whom they can understand, they already know it, the subject matter, right? So you have to be very careful in thinking through that. And in synopsis, one should get an idea that you are thinking about the whole manuscript, how the whole argument in the book will flow for the reader, right? And that's what is important. I think why the book is marketable, as Nishta is saying, why will it hook the audience? Your target audience is important to say, right? And why will that be of interest? Telling us, your own marketing channels is always useful because it tells us that you are already active in public engagement and can push the book through that public engagement. So, I mean, a successful book is good book writing merged with good marketing, right? And both are necessary kind of conditions. So, other than writing a very tight argument, making sure you know who your audience is and sharpen it as much as you can, right? The worst thing is say that this is a book for a general audience. That's like the worst thing ever to say, right? That cannot be your target audience, right? It could be either a college student, or it can be a business professional, or it could be a high school student, right? Or it could be people who are interested in specific genres. But please be sharp about that definition. Please tell us how you will hook that. Please tell us what is going to cover in the book. And again, I'm just mentioning a point which I mentioned before, that scope it out, right? Don't tell us about a very, I will talk about neuroscience and art, right? Or I will tell you about, something about data and data and privacy and something like that, right? These are topics where a lot of books have been written, etc. So we want to know what are you going to bring to the table, and what is your scope among all of this, right? I would also caution people that this book writing fellowship is uh, to write on the evidence which is already there. If you are trying to present new work which is not peer reviewed and published in a journal or conference, this is not the place for us. Till you don't publish it in a journal or a conference, get it peer reviewed and so on, it should not come into a book. So that could be an academic book which you write, but here we are looking for things which are already established as per science. Right. So those would be a few thoughts out here.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. A related question, which is kind of specific here from Megha Shada. Is there a preferred tense while writing a synopsis for the proposal? Present tense, past tense?
It can be present tense. The book talks about this thing, or it presents or it
could even be the book will talk. Both work.
Yeah, it's not that important. Yeah.
Okay. And then there's another question by Samrat Mukhopadhyay around the interviews. So he says, if I plan to conduct interviews or engage in photo documentation, I believe it's essential to obtain proper permissions. In case of photojournalism, there are specific formats for securing the permission. Is there any resources available for that, or can authors just create their own permission formats if needed?
Nishta, I don't know if you have anything on this.
I don't know photojournalism, but we did include. So we have done interview-based books, and we have included photos from those people as well. So of course, you have to take it from them, and you have to mention a proper caption, and it has to be officially provided by them to you. If you're taking it from somewhere, always take their permission. For formats, I don't know, but like, it depends on your book size. So when you're deciding the layout, so it automatically, so in our case, like, this is the book size. So then some of the photos, like, that you have to decide when you're doing the page layout kind of thing. And your editor will help with that. But if it's a proper photojournalism book itself, then I'm not the right person to comment on it. What are the permissions required?
Yeah, I think two comments, right? One, I think you can create your own based on whatever standards are there for data sharing and so on. But I think for this particular query, the FAST team will also talk to a couple of publishers and come back to you as to see the sad part is that in India no one follows anything. There are more international guidelines around permission format and so on. But I think we should follow whatever best practices there globally. So we'll try to look into it and come back to you.
All right. So I guess these are all the questions that we have for today. And it was
One question is
yeah.
there from Sangeeta, I think. Can you just
So
read that out?
Sangeeta, yes, has dropped a message saying that just for context, could one of the speakers tell us what would have been the target audience for the Feynman book that came up in the discussion, or any other popular science book with its intended audience? So Varun.
I think Feynman was anyway such a celebrated person that, like, I mean, anybody would want to read that book because it's coming from Feynman. But otherwise, I would say, like, for Freakonomics, I think it was appealing more to like the intellectual curiosity. So even though they were going very deep into statistics and analytics, but they kept it case basis kind of thing, citing very interesting case studies, right? Like global cooling effect, suicide bombers, like, so making it interesting and then just presenting it using a study. And the writing there was very well. So I think that would probably be a general adult audience interested in, like, maybe business aspects or stats kind of thing. Varun, do you want to add anything to this?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think, I mean, some people are so famous that they can
Yeah.
write anything and everything, and that sells, right? So that's a different category altogether. Then book writing becomes a business because you know that the book will sell by the person's kind of name. But like, I can give you another example, right? If you look at for Logicomics, which was like Bernard Russell, it's clearly for math nerds, right? And it could be math nerds of any age. I mean, till I think math nerds who are at least done 10th class math, otherwise they would not follow half of the book, right? I think Robert Kenninger's book, The Man Who Knew Infinity, would appeal to people who are interested in. I think the way that book is written, I would still position it as.
It's on Ramanujam, right?
It's on Ramanujan, right?
Okay.
Yeah, but the way the book is written, I think it's clearly high school students and undergrad. Sorry, Nishta, you're trying to make
Yeah, and sometimes I feel like, the book is written for a certain audience, but then they become so popular, then they become a general audience book. But
Correct.
in the beginning itself, nobody is trying to write a general audience
That's
book.
a good point, right? Like
Yeah.
the book takes life of
Yeah.
their own, right? And after there's always this hockey stick growth if they reach.
So don't go by these very super successful bestseller books because they became bestseller afterwards. But when you're writing, still think of, like, who am I writing for? Who's my primary audience? Who's going to first pick up this book and make it more popular?
Yeah, and if you look at like a book like Man Who Knew Infinity, right? A lot of people have not read it. It's not a book which everyone reads. It's a 500-page book, and
Yeah.
it's hard to read cover to cover per se. And Robert Kenninger does a great job in fusing biography of Ramanujan with the math concept, which he keeps explaining in between. But if I would write that book for today's time and appeal in India, I would rather write a 200-page book on Ramanujan than writing a 500-page book. Play out on some of the emotive things around it, on how he wrote to Hardy, I beg to introduce myself, or something like that, right? On those things, right? So yeah, don't get hoodwinked by some of these. Remember that our first audience is anyway Indian audience, and we're creating a book for Indian audience, right? I'll quickly also take up Bitasta's question. Bitasta, both. So we are looking for hard science books and also science from a social context. So we are open to both these kind of categories.
Right. There is one more question by Subhajit Sen, and they're saying that like when addressing sensitive issues, how does one keep it factual without actually revealing the source if they choose to be anonymous, right? And are there any tips or tricks to avoid or prevent such confrontations in books and still make it factually palatable for the reader? Also, in such cases, do we have to keep the proof of such anonymity if there is any legal query like in the future?
Look, I think uh, legal advice you should get from a lawyer. We are not here competent to, if you think there's any such topic the book will touch on, which could create a legal issue, you should, consult a lawyer before writing it. Like the standard things are to keep things anonymous, use pseudonyms, make
Yeah.
sure whatever you are writing, you have permission to write it, and you are not disclosing, things which you should not be, and so on and so forth. Uh, uh, that's all, yeah, what I can say on this topic. Of course, if you will share more detail with us on an email, we of course cannot comment on the legal aspect still, but if it is from a point of view of writing tips to it, or what would the publisher need, we could give you some insight.
So this has been a wonderful session, amazing learning session, and I'm sure our attendees agree. We've covered a plethora of topics with hacks kind of interspersed in the entire discussion, ranging from, difference between books and articles, talking about outlining, sectioning the book, staying consistent with writing, the lessons, imposing self deadlines, overcoming writer's block, peer review, getting the things verified, book proposal, book publishing, and a bit on permissions as well. I would like to thank Varun and Nistha once again for taking their time out to address our shortlisted candidates and for sharing their advice and experiences. We thank our audience members for staying with us on a Thursday evening, making this webinar a successful and interactive one.